Good afternoon. I'm Alan Rosen. I went to Project India in 1956, some 58 years ago, which seems quite amazing to me. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon with all of you. As the great philosopher said, I'm very happy to be anywhere this afternoon. My role in this program, which I put on my iPad, is to move things along as expeditiously as possible this afternoon so that it will conclude before 5 o'clock, to keep your noise level low, to introduce and promote your courteous attention to the speakers, and to encourage you to take a book about Project India home with you along with your noshing. I want to acknowledge the presence here this afternoon of the UCLA Chancellor Eugene Bloch and his wife Carol. The Chancellor is over there. I also want to acknowledge Professor Gupta of the UCLA International Institute Center for India and South Asian Studies. He and the Chancellor are going to India later this year, I understand, or next year. The Chancellor could have been a member of Project India. I also want to take a moment for the people who've organized this affair this afternoon to note the absence of Lois Kennison Bennis, who was one of the coordinators of this whole effort. She was feeling too ill to attend this afternoon, and we want to recognize her and her presence. Usually I'm just spontaneous, but I was told today to not be spontaneous, to try and prepare.
I hear you.
Well, that's why I was told not to be spontaneous. One student played a rather primary role in the development of Project India. That person is here with us today. One of three students out of 14, one of 3 out of 14 that pioneered Project India in 1952. I was not personally at UCLA when Dave Lund was a student, so I cannot claim to have known him in his student days. But I have known Dave Lund for almost a decade now, and I can see the mature David Lund, what an outstanding student leader he must have been to help create Project India. His wife, Marilyn Silva, in her own right, is an unstoppable force. So to introduce the beginning of the program, I'd like to call on Marilyn Silva Lund and David Lund.
Thank you, Alan, for all those kind words. And I want to thank all of you for coming to this special event, this book launch. It's hard to believe that Project India, those of us in the first team, happened 62 years ago. And thanks to Judy, we now have a book. What is not too hard to believe, however, is that how much India has changed my life and the lives of so many others. After we hear from the author, for those of you who wish to see it, we will play a few minutes of a video which was made at a reunion held in Hyde Park in New York in 2005. It was the first time that Project Indians of the first year, the first team, described how the project actually began, and very nearly didn't. Thank you.
I think at this point, to expedite things along, to stop the line of you who are buying books for a few minutes, and we'll call upon 3 individuals who produced this book today. First of all, Judy Graven. while Dave Lund is the one who said, let's go to India, it was Judy Graven who said, let's do a book about Project India. And we thought, like many thought about when Dave said, let's go to India, we thought, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And when Judy said, yeah, let's do a book, we said, yeah, sure, go ahead, Judy. And by golly, she's produced a book. And she had two excellent helpers in that. Carl Tanny, who did the graphics, and Marcel Green, Judy's lovely daughter, without whom I think the book would not have ended up as good as it is, and that is that of the editing of the book. And so we'd like to present Judy Graven first, and then Marcel Green and Carl Tanny to talk about the production of this book.
Well, for those of you who had me sign their books, I'm Judy. The Project India story takes place in 1952. Was that my joints? 1952 through 1969. That seems like a very long time ago. But the political and social world that emerged during the 1950s and 1960s is still very much part of our world today. Countering the spread of communism was a motivation for Project India. Today, the same type of threats from competing ideologies and probably imperialistic ambitions loom in our political world. Indians are probably still asking questions such as, why are you giving military aid to Pakistan? And what is the real motive behind U.S. intervention in the Middle East? And our society is still struggling with questions that they ask. Are Black Americans really treated as equals? Why do so many Americans use drugs? So I hope this book helps to provide some perspective on these issues that continue to dominate our news. The idea of writing the book took shape in 2009, that's 5 years ago, at a Project India reunion at the UCLA Conference Center in Lake Arrowhead. We wanted to chronicle our story and discuss options. A book would be the most permanent record, but the most work. Who knows why, but for some reason I volunteered to head up the project. I have a background in market research, and I really enjoyed doing the research, getting to know the extraordinary group of people who are PI alums. Then I had the fortune of discovering that Dr. Graham Gunther had a manuscript of a book that she thought of writing. It was at the Charles Young Research Archives, and that was gave me a lot of marvelous information. I even went back to College Park, Maryland, to the State Department Archives and dug out more information about Project India. So then I drafted this enormous thing. And dear Dave Lund, Howard Harrison, Diane Donahue, and Craig Cunningham all read the whole thing. And some tips on information, facts and format and style. But I still had this sprawling document that needed to be turned into a finished product. I needed help. My rescuer turned out to be my daughter, Marcel Green. She has a master's in professional writing from USC. And she is had a career in editing and marketing. Her father, Tom Green, was the leader of the 1959 team. So she took on a story that she was raised with. We reversed our roles as mom and daughter. She was just terrific. And I never looked back at what she deleted, which was over 300 pages. Because I realized that at some point, especially prolific authors, need to let go. As the book took shape, another incredible volunteer offered to do the graphics, Carl Tanny of the 1962 team. I think the book that we are celebrating today represents not only the work of the three of us, but of all the Project Indians who gave their diaries to me, letters, photos, memories. We did that book together. The book is dedicated to Dave Lund and Adeline Graham Gunther, the two people who had the imagination and determination to launch Project India. Dave Lund's guiding ethic in life has been to do his best to make a difference in the lives of people born into a very unequal world. And Graham, when she learned the project was terminating, summed up the 18 years of the project by saying, America has a tremendous asset in its young people. I hope that this book will provide the inspiration and encouragement for today's youth to pursue their most fantastic ideas and dreams.
I was not initially sold on my mother's idea for the structure of this book, which was to go through year by year, team by team, 18 years of Project India. But she really wanted to honor every single Project Indian and to recognize the contributions of each team. And I'm glad she stuck to her guns, because in the final edition of the book, as we were editing it, we went back to check some endnotes at the URC archives here at UCLA and discovered that the entire file had been misplaced and lost. So she documented this book just in time, and it is the only complete record of Project India and will stand as the go-to resource as we go forward. So the problem became, how do we take this structure and apply a narrative arc that will keep the reader going from year to year and develop some sort of a theme so that by the time you finish the book, you close it feeling like you've learned something bigger than just what a bunch of college kids did in India. And because of the historical backdrop that she puts in, that narrative arc emerged quite naturally from what was happening in America during the 1950s and 60s. It provided that perfect story structure. And some of my favorite parts of the book are how the early teens go over to India self-assured and certain about our American message and get exposed to this Indian perspective that really predicts the whole civil rights struggle ahead. I love how the early teens are completely baffled by the fact that the Indian students strike as a way of protesting national policy. They can't understand it. And yet by the time the 1960s teens are going, American students are doing the same thing back home, demonstrating against the Vietnam War. I love how the whole thing just gets turned on its head, how by the end in the 60s you actually have some of the students going to India seeking answers because they've recognized that this long-standing culture might have something that we don't know. I love how in the book we go to teach them about America and end up learning so much about our own culture and ourselves. it was really fun to work on. I very much enjoyed getting to know all of the Project Indians through your memories and some of you in person. It was super fun working with my mom. We had daily emails and conversations and arguments about wording and concepts, and it was really a fun period for us that I think when we look back on our long relationship, we will identify as one of the highlights. And I just want to thank all of the Project Indians for making me part of the team. Thank you.
I came to this project rather late. Judy had basically finished the writing, and Marcel was into her final editing of the book. And I heard about it through Lois Bendis's India Inc. Newsletter that she sends out, and then I heard about this book being produced. And I'm a graphic designer, and as a graphic designer, I realized that, or I thought that the project would be a very consuming production. So I volunteered to help whoever the graphic designer was. I just assumed that there was a graphic designer. And, you know, behold, there wasn't. And I became it. I was never involved in a book of this length, and so it was what, 334 pages, I believe, altogether. It was a great collaboration with Judy and Marcel. There weren't too many team pictures over the years, and so we wanted to make it kind of user friendly, and so a lot of us had collected Indian treasures, you know, that we had bought in India, and so we decided to just put some of those things, you know, amongst the narrative. I think the book is a wonderful account of the Project Indians involved during that tumultuous period in our history, the 1950s and 1960s. It was a privilege for me to be on the 1962 team as well as being involved in this book, and I thank you for that.
Carl didn't tell you that on the cover of the book is an interesting picture of a woman you're going to hear from in a minute, Sister Diane Donahue. And Sister Diane, however, has a slight modern addition. For those of you who've already bought the book, you can see this on the cover. If you haven't bought the book before you leave, you can buy one on the way out and see the cover, which has Sister Diane sitting talking to a group of Indian students. But Sister Diane was pointing. And in the racial history of this country, pointing is often taken as an objective notice. One of my friends ran the campaign for Wilson Riles, the first black superintendent of public instruction in California, and my friend, when he was advising Wilson Riles, who was black, he said, "Sit on your hands during the televised debates." And Wilson Riles said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you don't want any shots of you pointing at Max Rafferty, the white incumbent, because the white community takes umbrage at things like that, a black man pointing at a white man." And Wilson Riles did sit on his hands, and he was elected the first black superintendent of public instruction in California. Well, Carl knew that kind of concept intuitively, and so here was Sister Diane pointing at a group of Indian students. So Carl had to change her hand, and he grafted on the hand of his wife. If she would raise her hand, she's sitting in the corner. So that's her hand on the cover of the book, superimposed on Sister Diane's body. So there's a great subtlety in Carl's graphic design, as there was a great subtlety in all of what Project India did. And I belong to a number of groups, but no group I've belonged to in the last 58 years has had the same cohesion at getting together and keeping in touch as the UCLA Project India groups of the 1950s and then the 1950s and 60s. And so because of that today, Project India is very sensitive and very concerned at the loss of any of those who we've been so close to for the past more than half a century. And so I'm going to call upon Sister Diane Donahue to come up and speak a little bit on behalf of those of us at Project India about the people we've lost, particularly the Project Indian who was supposed to be here today and who died last week, who was a member of the original 1952 team, which had been four coming today: Marty and Joan Meyersick-Rosen, Dave Lund, and Ernie Leitner.
Since our last Sunset reunion in 2012, we've lost Pierre Mornell, David Pearson, Duke Sturmer, Don Ulrich, Jane Braceth, and Ernie Leitner. Ernie and I go way back. In 1950, we were both on the panel of Americans for the University Religious Conference. And at that time, it was a Catholic, a Protestant, and a Jew, a Latino, an African American, and either Japanese or Chinese, and sometimes both. But there usually were 6 of us on a team. And Ernie was a World War II veteran and was in the submarine corps. And he talked about, in his training, being excused, and he used to underline excused, from life-saving, so that they did not want an African-American, Negro, and white in the same pool at the same time. So he was excused. I lived in Ernie's home that he grew up in on Sutro for 25 years. We were renters. And I had met him at a reunion, and I said, I just was looking for a place. And he said, I have a 3-bedroom house that's empty, and I would love to have you be a rentor. And so we did for 25 years on Sutro. So Ernie and I go way back. And I had called him to tell him about this gathering, and he said, we'll be there. And today, Dina Leitner, his daughter Laurel Leitner, and his cousin are all here. And that is such a tribute to him. And so I would like to share with you the remarks of Colville Brown. He was on the 59 team. And he's written the following, which he has allowed us to share. Ernie was the adult supervisor on my team in 1959. He was also one of those exquisitely rare individuals whose guidance changed my life for the better. As a farm boy, Alaskan, I grew up in societies where I did not knowingly mingle with the others. This was, to put it kindly, I was very unobservant in many ways. One example was my asking Carl Jacobson at the Harvard Business School if he was Norwegian. Carl dined out. He talked about that for many years. He didn't wear a yarmulke. How was I to know? We were flying to India. I was growing more and more worried about my ability to do this job, whatever it was going to be. Moreover, I was seriously worried about the truth of myself when it came to things like how I felt or thought about, quote, Negroes. Blacks hadn't been invented then. I went to Ernie, asking his seatmate to switch with me so that we could talk. I asked him if I was prejudiced. He looked at me with patience and kindness. Well, let's talk about that. And for the next hour and a half, we discussed how people judge and prejudge. We discussed the differentiation between bias and prejudice. He set up scenarios where I was to choose, like in a hiring situation. And he taught me how to think. Remember the times we were in pre-civil rights. It was not nice out there for a lot of people. Ernie, then and now, stands out as one of the wisest, fairest, most understanding individuals I have ever met. He taught me how to see things. Koval, I promise you, by the time we return home, you will not see the color. You will see the person. It happened. For the rest of my life, while I turn the page, for the rest of my life, my view has changed, and so has my thinking. Here and there, I've done the odd good thing, all because of Ernie. What he showed us on the trip was a higher standard of human conduct in all circumstances. More than a man, Ernie was, and still is, a spirit of goodness among us. I am certain that he has helped many through his life, and therefore his contribution will go on and on and on. And let the people say, Amen.
Right. I was just saying to David Lund, how do we want to end this? We should be selling more than just a book with such a sizable crowd. But in 2005, we had a reunion at Hyde Park, a Project India reunion. About 40 members of Project India attended. And we had a panel, which was, how did Project India begin? And that was taped. And so this large screen isn't there for decoration. It's for those of you who are interested in Project India, which we consider such a unique enterprise, fostered by UCLA and the University Religious Conference. We're going to replay that tape. It's about 15 minutes for those of you who want to get up close to the front and and see that tape. It's a discussion of the people who originally went, created the idea. So this is for Project India, probably our last hurrah. It's hard to hold reunions. Most of us are falling apart or staggering around. But so we'll just sort of end the program. Those of you who haven't seen the book and want to see what graphic design imposition can do to a piece of literature, buy the book. Yes, Joan.
I think it's important to say to everyone here that a lot of people picked up on what young people could do in interpreting American values that were employed by State Department. And ultimately, the birth of the Peace Corps was definitely related to our being there and all the documents therein. I just had to mention that.
For those of you who really want to know the story of the Peace Corps and Project India, I think the book might detail some of it, but there's no question that the Peace Corps came to UCLA in its early years in 1961 to look at, I think, the training methods and the application screenings that Project India was doing as a precept for how the Peace Corps would work. And we do happen to know that one of the advisors to John Kennedy as he was running for president in 1960 was Harrison Woolford. Harrison Woolford later became the U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. But he had a younger brother, Jack Woolford, who was a student at Harvard, who wrote to the State Department requesting funds to go to India and was told to call Project India at UCLA, and did, and became part of the Project India team from UCLA in 1954. 6 years later, his older brother was an advisor, a close advisor to Jack Kennedy. Anyway, is there any other comments from the audience in addition to what Joan just said? Then we'll start the tape and welcome you and bid you adieu.
This was an absolutely wonderful event that honored the beginning of Project India and the book that Judy Graven wrote with her daughter. And we are so grateful to be a part of it. My husband in 1952, is that correct, David?
That's correct.
Said, let's go to India. And that was the start of Project India, which lasted
Nearly 2 decades.
Nearly 2 decades. 62 years ago, this man said, let's go to India.
And we finally get a book.
And we finally got a book. Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful. Love you.